In this video, I share with you 6 top tips from pro athletes that will make you better faster while working out less hard. I said that, less hard. That has to do with your heart rate. But first, I was world or nationally ranked in 3 sports while working 80 to 100-hour weeks. So I truly have figured out how to fit it in. One funny one was active recovery. What that means is if you've worked and run and run and run, the next day you get up and you run again. Crazy, right? All right, so here's what we're going to cover in the video. We're going to cover 6 things. We're going to cover signal versus noise in terms of how do you signal your body? How do you stay consistent in your self-care so that your workouts stay on track? The importance of showing up. In that one, there was a bodybuilding competition, North American Championships for AAU 2017. I showed up and no one else showed up for physique, and I ended up winning North American Championship. Showing up is key. And then in the second half, we're going to cover what should your specific heart rate be. It's going to be a lot lower than you think. Tips for weekend warriors. And we're also going to talk about moving averages in both nutrition and workouts. So let's jump in. Signal versus noise. So I had this Ironman trainer, amazing. And he was training for one of his Ironmans and he had this massive bike accident. So he was hospitalized and eventually he's coming out. Now, he's only 3 months away from his Ironman competition, but he had such severe injuries that he basically had to lay in an ice bath the entire time. He visualized his race. So he started with a base, but all he could do for those 3 months before the race was visualize what he was going to do. Now, this is an extreme example, but he finished his Ironman. It's an amazing feat, right? And so what does this mean for you? This means that you can go out and do a little bit less, but really identify with yourself as an athlete. Picture the success that you're going to have. Picture the great run that you're going to have and stay in that positive attitude. All right. Number 2, consistent self-care. What do I mean by this? One of my other trainers was actually going for the world championship in indoor track 100 miles. I said that. 100 miles going around and around like a hamster. That takes a special type of personality. And at mile 85, his legs started cramping because he hadn't been taking in enough salt. And so the lesson here for all of us is just consistently making sure that we stay on top of our self-care. What I do when I run is I take in a little bit of salt every 30 minutes. And it doesn't matter if I feel like I need it or I feel like I don't. And that means that a couple of hours in, I'm not falling apart. This has actually resulted in me winning several competitions because other people started to falter towards the end. All right, number 3, show up and relax. Dean Karnazes is the most amazing man. He ran 50 marathons in 50 days consecutive in 50 states. Before I read about Dean, I used to get so stressed. I had to do my 9-minute miles. I had to run a certain pace. I had to do a certain amount of weights. And Dean described that he would just go out and run. And then if he had to go to the bathroom, he'd stop by somewhere, go to the bathroom, and then he'd go back out and run some more. When I took on this, I was able to run further, get more fit with less stress. Dean actually ran to Napa. His wife came and picked him up the next day. And on his run, he's like, gosh, I'm hungry. And so he actually called pizza delivery and they delivered to him while he was running. He didn't even stop to sign the credit card. They actually drove next to him and took his credit card. And then he rolled up the pizza and ate it as he's running. Now, I'm not suggesting this for everybody, and most of Dean's nutrition is quite good, but it just goes to show you, you don't have to be so rigid, and a little more relaxation can really help. So if you've been enjoying this so far, what we're going to cover in the second half is more details on what your heart rate should be, how to use moving averages, and how to use periodization for those of you who feel like you're a weekend warrior. Before that, if you're enjoying this, please feel free to subscribe and get access to my special free newsletter to keep you up to date on all of these health tips. All right, so moving averages. Isn't that for stocks? Well, here's the thing. One time I was running in a 50K, and now 50K is 30 miles. And I felt like, oh, I got to get in all the nutrition. I've got all this workout that I've done. I've got to match it with all the calorie intake. And my body was just like, oh, I can't handle it. Why this is because my body wanted to work on getting rid of the inflammation from the run. It didn't want to have to process all that food. And truly, if you think about our ancestors, they started out, right? They would go for days to hunt, and then they would eat and feast once they killed an animal, right? And so they're not matching output and input, right? They're just kind of looking at more over the averages. So what I did was I would stop eating at about 10 o'clock in the morning the day before a race. Then I would, to kind of let my digestive system get totally rested and not be working on digestion when I race. The next morning I would race. I would race all day or several hours. I'm not that fast. Then if I want to eat a little something, I do. If I don't, I don't. And then the next day, so Sunday, then I would eat and I wouldn't work out nearly as much. And so my body could kind of work on one thing at a time. What does this mean for you? You don't have to stress out if some days you work out more or less and some days you eat more or less. Think about it as a moving average. All right, periodization. I mean, that word frightens me, but it's really like Legos. Athletes use this and they figure out that there's periods in their seasons, in their years, in their months, in their weeks. And there's periods to be tougher on yourself and periods to be easier on yourself. This is most obvious if you think about a year. You're going to have times in the year where you're not racing, right? And so you work on your base, you work on some fundamentals, etc. And this is going to be the same in a month. If you're ramping, if every week you do more than the week before, you're very likely to get injured. So one of the best practices is to do 2 upticks and then 1 downtick. So you kind of go up, and then down. And the down is not as low as you were before, but is not as high as those upticks. And so if you imagine it like Legos, you kind of build up and then you come back down and you build across, you build your base, and then you build up again. What this means for weekend warriors, you don't have to always do more. And you can fit your intensity and your base building in during the week. And then you can do longer workouts during the weekend. Working on your base during the week, doing something, not only goes back to signaling yourself, but it builds that base for less injuries during the weekends. All right, finally, heart rate. We are all working out too hard to build aerobic capacity. What do I mean by that? So Mark Allen was a fine professional Ironman, but he was kind of placing 5th, 6th, 7th, not enough to make a living at it. It's tough to make a living as an Ironman. One of his friends recommended that he train with Phil Maffetone. And so Phil has this really interesting calculation for your heart rate that I'm going to share with you. It's 180 minus your age. And then if you've had any injuries, hospitalizations, illnesses, you minus another 10 beats. If you have been inconsistent with your workouts or you're just starting back, you minus another 5 beats. And if you're over 65 or you've been super consistent and this is working for you for a while, then you can add back 5 beats. So that ends up being a very low number, and that is 100% of your aerobic capacity. So then you work out at 85% of that. For me, that number is 111. That is a low number to be running at. All right, so let's jump into it. So Mark Allen goes to Phil Maffetone. And this guy's a professional Ironman. An Ironman, you cycle 112 miles, you swim 2.5 miles, and then you run a marathon, and you do it all in one day. This guy's been doing that, and he goes to Phil Maffetone, and Phil says, here's the heart rate you have to work out at, gives him his calculation, and Mark Allen's like, I can't believe I'm a professional Ironman and I'm having to walk up the hills in my training runs. So he calls his friends and he's like, who is this guy that you recommended to me? Like, this is crazy. And they said, no, stick with it, stick with it. So he did. After 6 months, he could power up these hills at the lowest heart rate. His aerobic capacity went through the roof. And this can happen for you too. Now, Mark Allen went on to have far less injuries and win the Ironman World Championship 6 out of 10 years. He's the most that's ever done it. Phil Maffetone has said that when he puts athletes on this program, that it reduces injuries by 60%, 60. So what does this mean for you? How low? Have you run that calculation? How low is that heart rate? Go and give it a try and you will be amazed how fast you can build your cardio capacity. You may be doing a lot of walking, but walking is building your cardio capacity faster than running will. All right, so when we get down to it, I want you to relax a little more, enjoy a little bit more. You'll get more out of your workouts. Now, will you start working out with a lower heart rate maybe? Will you give yourself a little bit of a break on moving averages? Will you add to consistency by not being so tough on yourself? I hope you like this video. Hit subscribe if you want to see more. And check out my other videos. To join the best conversations on your health, you can find me in these channels on social media.